But yeah, aside from being versatile, you want to be able to do everything that's asked of you as a bass player, to fit into different gigs. That includes play fretted bass, play fretless bass, 4-string bass, 5-string bass. These days, definitely keyboard bass. I'm called to do that a lot. Sing. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Everybody wants people in the band that sing. Having all these skills together will help get you called consistently. In addition to being able to play all those styles of music, just having the right instruments for the situations that you're in will help you. If you're trying to get into the pop rock touring scene, don't show up to an audition with a band or to sit in with a band like with a 7-string fretless with LEDs in the fingerboard. I mean that's going to scare people away. A bass like that might be, like I was saying with the solo thing, like that might be the bass that allows you to play what you hear in your head, and that's your bass to make your art with. But when you're trying to work with other people, you want to give them what they want, and these days, a P bass and a jazz bass, for most of the working situations you'll be in, that's what you need. Yeah, I mean, yeah, even if you can, rock out with a pick like nobody's business on that 7-string, no one's going to care. They're going to see that thing strung up all, strapped up all high in your chest, and they're going to be like, yeah, I'm not calling this guy. But yeah, I mean, if you're trying to get into touring and recording, definitely a P bass and jazz bass, some kind of 5-string. You got to have a 5-string these days. You see a lot of guys in that scene playing, more kind of no frills basses, like a 5-string jazz or Music Man Stingray, that sort of thing. There's a lot of companies that make P and jazz bass copies, like boutique kind of things, like Lakeland and Sadowski, and those are great choices. Actually, an example of that, when I first moved to town, I moved here in '97, and I was trying to get into that scene, trying to audition for some tours and things like that. And one of the first tours that I got called for, it was like kind of a rootsy pop rock thing. They were about to go out on tour, and the drummer that I knew heard about it, called me for the audition. And the bass I was playing at the time, I just got it, and I was all stoked about it. It was a Sadowski 5-string. It was their modern 5 with the EMG soap bar pickups. Great bass, but very much like an active, high-end, modern-sounding bass, like, really good fusion bass, which is kind of what I was into at the time. It was bright purple, flame maple top. I was totally stoked on it, got it custom made, picked the color myself, So I showed up to this audition with that thing, probably had it strapped up kind of high back then, I was a fusion guy. Yeah, and so, I auditioned, and I thought I played well, but I didn't get the gig, And it was like my first audition. I was like, well, what happened? I thought I did a good job. And I talked to the drummer afterwards. And I was like, what was up? I wanted to learn. I wanted to figure out why I didn't get the gig. And he's like, man, don't you have a P bass or something? I was like, no. He's like, dude, get a P bass if you want to do this. Like that's what people want to see. It's what they want to hear. Like I was like, really? Like makes that big a deal? Because back then I was like, I can play anything on this bass. I can play Motown on this bass. I can play with a pick on this bass. But he got me thinking that all right, maybe I should expand my arsenal a little bit. So I think that day or the next day I went to the vintage department over at Guitar Center here in Hollywood and picked up a really cool '78 P bass, and I think I actually started getting calls because of that bass. Like I got more compliments on the sound of that bass than I did on the Sadowski. And I was just like, wow, okay, simple, basic, it's good. If you're going to get into the studio scene, for sure, a Fender P bass and a Fender jazz bass. If you're working with producers and engineers, they want that. It's a tried and trusted sound. If you ask any big time studio guy what their main bass is that they play and record with, I guarantee most of them will say, a 60-something P bass. Even if you have a boutique P bass or jazz bass, I have a good friend who's a great bass player, plays with a major artist, and he plays Lakeland basses, which are great. I play Lakeland as well. But he went to a session and had a Lakeland 5-string, and it was real simple. It was passive 5-string Lakeland jazz bass, and he brought out of the case, and the producer was like, "Ooh, you don't have a Fender or something like that?" And he's like, "Really? This is like a Fender, And people are that particular, especially in the studio scene, and especially with vintage instruments, if people see you pull out like a vintage P bass or jazz bass, that they know what it sounds like. They know they can get a good sound in the studio with that. And that's going to keep people happy. And then I mean, vintage instruments are expensive, but these days, like Fender has a lot of reissues that are really great. They have this Road Worn series that's awesome. Even Squier, they're making great basses now. Like they're like $300. They have this classic Vibe series, like P basses and jazz basses. If you don't play one of those basses, if you're kind of more into the high end thing like I was talking about, and you want to get into working, start with one of those. They're great instruments for the price. And also if you're getting into doing studio work, the more options you have, the better. You got to have some kind of fretless. You got to have a 5-string. Hollow bodies are great. I've got a Hofner and a Univox hollow body that see a lot of action in the studio. It's a really, they're both really particular sounds. They don't work for everything, but every now and then you'll show up at that session and you'll hear the track and be like, yeah, okay, this bass is going to work, and they sound really cool. And basically the more options that you can give the artist, the producer, the engineer, the better. And the more apt they're going to be to call you again.